So I want to talk about something that you definitely need to hear, all of us, all over the world. And we need to talk about this subject of the religious you versus the spiritual you, and how you shouldn't let religious people, even yourself, because there's religious people as a collective, and then there's the religious you. Don't let the religious you lower your spiritual IQ. Now, when you think about spirituality, I just want you to think about a set of beliefs that shapes your morality and who you are. And I want you to divide this into two categories. Spirituality with a belief system or worldview that's connected to God with religion, or spirituality that's connected with a creator as religion, or a creator from the standpoint of being an agnostic, or a creator from a standpoint of being an atheist. Because even if you don't believe that an intelligent maker created everything, if you believe that things just happen by chance, that's still creation. Because if you have creation, you have to have a creator. It's chance and evolution that becomes the creator at that particular point. So these are still summarized as beliefs. Now, the reason why this is important, because rather you are an atheist, agnostic, Islam, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, or whatever, that person has a religious belief, even an atheist, because it forms a religion, which is a pious attachment to something or anything, because they have their own sets of beliefs, whether it's true or not. Even then, an atheist, as an example, can become a strict atheist, imposing certain views on another atheist that may want to have some conventional views that's not fundamental to atheist beliefs, as an example. And this lowers our spiritual IQ. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So this is some life wisdom that I wanted to share due to my involvement with being a religious person. Now, I believe in the Bible, and I practice being a moral agent of God's word, and I'm spiritual, and I want to follow the things that's in the Bible, but I don't want to be a religious person, because it's the religious people that continuously get things wrong. It's the religious people that give God a bad name, if you read the Bible carefully. Now, we have to reshape our thinking, because Jesus said, happy is the man conscious of his spiritual need, not happy is the man who conscious of his religious need. You see, we have to understand and look at religion like exercising. Exercising is good. We can go to a gym for that, but we don't need the gym. This is why Acts 17:24 says God's spirit does not dwell in man-made temples or buildings. Now, that doesn't mean that God's spirit can't be found in a religious setting. But God's spirit is not limited to just that setting. This is why Jesus said, when two or more gather in my name, there I will be, especially if you're a Christian. So wherever you're gathering in Jesus' name, no matter where you are, he will be. So it's not limited to a brick and mortar building, although those things have a good place and they help spread the message. That's why you have almost 1 billion Christians. Likewise with Islam, they almost have 1 billion with the Muslim religion. So we see how these things come into practice, and all religion is a pathway to God. Rather you call them Allah, Jehovah, just like in a lot of Baptist churches, they'll have Jehovah all throughout their books, their psalm books, and some of their pamphlets, just like some other religions use the name Jehovah. There's a lot of religions that use the name Jehovah, or some go with the more accurate terminology of Yahweh. So with that said, I wanted to say this. I want you to really think about percepts and precepts and concepts and conceptions. What occurred to me earlier was when the percepts are wrong, you're going to form the wrong perceptions, and then you're going to have the wrong conceptions. And then that's where your concepts come from. And then your concepts form your beliefs. And then that controls how you look at things. So what we want to do is go back to the roots of percepts. Where do we get these things from? Then when they become precepts, when we begin to form our laws around these perceptions, because perception is reality. Now, the bad part is when the perception is not objective reality. So when we think about this, incorrect perceptions automatically form incorrect conceptions. And then this is where cognitive dissonance comes in, where the person has a concept that they have a little bit of awareness to see is wrong, but not enough self-awareness to realize that the percept was wrong, that formed this wrong concept. So it's like their brain says, hey, something isn't right. You're saying, as an example, the Bible said God doesn't lie or God doesn't change. As an example, Luke 5:36-39 talks about you can't come up with new things or new teachings. Then somebody else might promote new teachings. Then that would contradict that. Or somebody has something where, like Hebrews 13:8 says Jesus doesn't change. And then that's the Son. And then Malachi 3:6 shows that God doesn't change, the Father. James 1:17 shows the Father doesn't change either. So we have the Son being consistent, and then we also have the Father being consistent. 1 Corinthians 11:3, the head of man, the head of woman is man, the head of man is Christ, the head of Christ is God. So Jesus Christ has a head. And that's just important to remember. Now, with that said, when we think about these wrong concepts, whenever we have cognitive dissonance, we have two competing thoughts. What we should do is go back to the percept that formed the perception. How do we get there? What were the roots of that? And that's how we can fix that mental turmoil. So we have to develop the gold standard. See, what we have to remember is, just like people that question the Bible, there's a gold standard that's above the Bible, which is research and history. Now, just because we see an element of history and research doesn't mean that it's true, because the person that's narrating or controlling what you see, or that's controlling putting history together, could misconstrue it purposely or not purposely. This is why it's important to look at the arguments on both sides and to realize that if we're truly seeking truth, if somebody makes a legitimate point, like as an example, somebody takes up an issue with Noah's Ark, and again, I'm going to do a video on this, but one thing would be, how did Noah gather all of these animals, two of every kind, as an example? Now, if you read Genesis chapter 6-8, you will see nowhere in there where Noah had to go to every continent to get animals. It says that God, read Genesis 6, 7, and 8, and I guarantee you're going to find that God himself sent the animals to Noah. I've heard people say that. So it's like we're reading two different things. It never said that Noah had to go gather them. God sent the animals to Noah. God is God. Matthew 19:26. All things are possible with God. Whatever you're thinking is impossible, that scripture says all things are possible. We have to realize as human beings that our knowledge is very limited when it comes down to trying to explain the essence of God or creator or the universe, however you want to say it. We don't know much about that. And there's so many things that people continue to overlook. Now, some things I just don't engage with anymore because some people don't have pure motives. It's like they're trying to force you to agree with them. even because you believe in certain things and they just want to have no hope at all, which is fine. And I'm not saying that that's a cliche response. You don't say, hey, I choose to believe just to have a hope. That's not my personality. It's one of those things where it's so much information to discuss. You realize when somebody is inherently being biased, they're more concerned about trying to get you to agree with them. And that shouldn't be the concern. If you're happy with your belief system, then take that. Now, if you want to talk about it to see certain things and just have a discussion and learn together, that's fine. But we all have to remember that we all do grow old, currently get sick, and die. So with that being said, if you don't care about people's beliefs, then you shouldn't waste your time trying to help people, because that's just for your own self gloating or whatever. You have to care about what people say and what they feel. But sometimes the most powerful statement is silence. And sometimes we do have to do that. Now, with that being said, religious people are judgmental. And it's not just religious as organized religion. I'm talking about atheists and agnostics too. That's a religion. It's a established set of beliefs with a no God as a God, or with a creator that's unnamed. They say, I believe in a creator, but it's not the creator of the Bible. So this person still is practicing a religion. But they also, I find it interesting, implement the same religious spirit as some overly zealous Christians or Muslims or Buddhists or whomever. It's like the same spirit. And it creates confusion and division. So when I think about a spiritual IQ, having a good percept that forms your perception before it forms your conception. It's like a percept is like the fetus. And the fetus has to be developed right before it becomes an embryo. And then before it becomes a full-blown baby. So we will never get to that stage if the other ones aren't right. You got to go through those 3 trimesters before you can produce the baby. But even before that, you have to have the man and the woman come together. So when you think about your concepts, do your best to go back to the roots of it all. And even when you see the roots, question, is this the real roots? Or is this skewed history that someone has given to me? And how you do that, you want to make sure you cover the social, the mental, the physical, the emotional, the cultural, the environmental, and the spiritual aspects of any belief. Think about it in a 6-part phase. And then also, always think about how other people view these things. Realize that science is very flawed too, unless it becomes a law of science. Sometimes people, here's what I want you to understand. Everything that becomes truth was once subjective in thought. Not subjective in reality, but subjective in thought. As an example, hypothesis. The hypothesis, if it's later proven to be true, it was already objectively true, but we didn't have the awareness to know. So we tested. So initially, when the consciousness hits your mind, hey, let me test this and do a control variable and experimental variable, that hypothesis that you're testing at this point, we don't know if it's true. Although it is true, we don't have the awareness. So it's subjective. All truths that we later realize as truth start off as subjective thoughts in our consciousness. But our consciousness is separate from reality. As an example, gravity doesn't need my consciousness to be what it is. It's going to be that no matter what. So what we have to acknowledge is all things that humans think of start off as subjective. Even our concept of God starts off as subjective. Our concept of the sun starts off as subjective. Everything, then we later establish it with facts that makes it objective in our thoughts. After it's been tested and tried. There's no hypothesis that starts off as objective. because other than that, it would need to be tested. It's tested and then it becomes that. So with that being said, it's important to understand that sometimes we are coming up with the wrong questions to ask. Sometimes we're coming up with the wrong answers because we ask the wrong questions. So when it comes down to our spiritual IQ, when it comes down to our spiritual need, just having correct beliefs and outlooks and perspectives on life, we have to get the rudimentary things correct first. And then how do we determine if it is correct? By what it produces in our lives. What we believe should match how we act. It is no good to believe in health and fitness and you don't practice it. So we shouldn't believe one way and live another. We also need to recognize this concept of morality. That also starts off as subjective. But what is morality? Atheists say one thing. There's some research to show that atheists have more morals than religious people. But the reality is they're still a religious person. But also that research is subjective, because when we look at per capita, what are we looking at this on? So we have to have some standards of something, because when people start debating what is a man and a woman, I mean, it's very simple. Science, you agree with science, X and Y. It shows you that that's what makes a male, and the difference between a woman. Now, if you go back to a philosophical thing, you want to start saying, well, people can choose. Well, if that's the case, then I can choose to be white. But that's not what the results show. What's the concept of that? I can choose to say that I'm a hippopotamus. I'm a hippo or whatever. But I'm not of that kind. I'm not an animal. I'm a human being. I can say that that I'm a tiger, but we know what tigers look like. So just like you would use an animal and a tiger's DNA to say, well, no, Isaac, you're a human being. Here's the differences. We have to look at, because sometimes people don't use science as science. They'll use science to mean what they want. And it's the same thing that happens with religion. The Bible is the gold standard example, or the Quran would be the gold standard in another religion, but people aren't sticking to it. So likewise, for example, if somebody's an atheist or agnostic, sometimes they don't stick to their own science. So something so simple as a nucleus, humans don't create a nucleus. That doesn't evolve. Where does it come from? So somebody has to create that. As an example, nobody can create an apple seed or an orange seed or a grape seed. We just know what to do with the seed and plant it with fertilizer and sunlight, and then we grow. We know how to produce the prescribed mechanisms. But somebody still created the seed. So that's where people get stuck. Now, it's easy just to acknowledge that that's an intelligent being. Just like we have coordinates, longitude and latitude. We use these coordinates to get anywhere on Earth. And they're measurable and they're sustainable. So 23.5 degree axis tilt. You know, all these different things when we look at the nature of the universe. And these things are structured a certain way to produce seasons. When we look at longitude and latitude, North Pole, South Pole, all these different things that I could name that were prescribed, that produce it, and it's predictable. These are laws put in place. So who created those laws? Precision. Just like no one would take apart a car with over 30,000 parts and just put it there and blow it up and think it will come together and be precise to form what we see. So likewise with the more complex universe. So with that said, don't let people lower your spiritual IQ. Have a good, healthy belief system. Establish the right percepts to form the right concepts. Because see, religious people, whether it be an atheist or an agnostic, I'm talking about going overboard and being judgmental, trying to force somebody, they get away from spirituality, which is having a healthy outlook and being well versed in all domains of all of that. To feed yourself with knowledge, to become wise, to feed yourself with correct knowledge to become wise, where your spirituality is able to have self-awareness, but you must first have awareness. You must have awareness of perceptions that form your conceptions. And then that's how you develop self-awareness. Self-awareness is how you eliminate cognitive dissonance. By default, cognitive dissonance happens when we don't have awareness of perceptions. See, awareness would just be aware of the perceptions. And then once we see the perceptions, then we're able to see where all of this stuff comes from. And then we develop self-awareness to be able to see where we have become a victim to a lack of self-awareness, because we all must be unaware before we become aware. If you think that you're already aware without being unaware for a while, then you've already lost. Then you're going to be also unaware in various other elements. And nobody is ever going to wake up fully in this lifetime because we don't live long enough to know everything. But that's sometimes why we go to other people who have studied subjects before us, and they may be very knowledgeable, but eliminate this concept of being an expert. How can somebody become an expert on anything when there's thousands of years of information that people can't consume? They only know just a little bit. So I think it's better to say that we are skilled learners and we have a skill set of knowing how to learn and discover information, but we are students in training, that we're on the path of advancing. That's just my personal concept. Now, we have an expertise, but if we have an expertise, then we should know all answers. See, when you look at it as it is, a lot of us have many things that we can't answer. That doesn't sound like an expert. So none of us are experts, in my opinion. That's how I choose to look at it. So invest in your spiritual health and don't let religious people lower your spiritual IQ. So keep on advancing. That's why some of the famous quotes, I'm the wisest man because I know nothing at all. Always lead with what you don't know so that you can know more. And this is very healthy. So feel free to share your thoughts. And it's just a good philosophical discussion that I wanted to have. So like, subscribe, share this content, and keep on thriving in life and be your best. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching.